If we were wait for all of these to ripen, they would all then get really soft and pass quickly. So with kiwis, because if you've ever had a kiwi sitting on your counter, right, like the moment it's ripe, you have to eat it. Like a couple days later, it's going to be a lot softer. Like they don't really last all that long. So the way that we do that is we wait. So what we do is we harvest them when they are still very firm, but we want them to be have a certain sugar content. If we don't, which just means that they have matured completely. So we want them to be fully matured, but not starting to soften. So we're looking for, there's kind of like an industry standard of sugar content. Have you ever heard of Brix testing for sugar content?
I had no idea how you do that till now.
Yeah, so there's a Brix scale. It's a measurement of the soluble solids in the fruit, and so in the liquid of the fruit, and so the soluble solids corresponds with basically the sugar content. There's other things in the soluble solids, but the kind of the more changing part of what's in soluble solids is the sugar. So
So like the ratio of carbohydrates to water.
huh?
The ratio of carbohydrates to water.
Is that a question?
I don't know. I think it's like how I'm like understanding a soluble solid.
Soluble, well, yeah. Let's see. My understanding is soluble solids is basically like the makeup of what is, not water in the liquid in the juice. So it's probably some acids and it's probably some proteins and it's a lot of sugar in a kiwi.
Interesting.
So, but what is changing is the sugar content. Mm-hmm. It increases as the fruit ripens. So we're looking for a certain Brix number, which is the percent of soluble solids. And the way that we find that out is using a refractometer. Has anyone ever used a refractometer? Yes. What have you used it for?
We did it for strawberries to see if it was better to harvest them in the morning or in the afternoon.
Oh. What is better?
Ooh.
We ended up just doing it in the morning because that's when we had labor and that was when the class was. But
right.
I think it was actually better in the afternoon, if I'm remembering correctly. It was a long time ago, but yeah.
Because there's a higher sugar content in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Whoa.
Okay. So refractometer is basically there's a prism. And so when light hits the prism, it bends, right? And when light hits a liquid, it bends. So the idea is that when light hits the prism, it bends more than when it hits a liquid. The prism is right here. And so if you were to squeeze some juice onto this prism and look through it, what you're seeing is kind of the angle of difference between the amount it's bending in the liquid and then the amount that that it's bending with the prism. So you're seeing the difference between those two, and that's your reading. And so basically if there's more sugar content, it's closer to the prism, which means the angle's lower and the sugar content is higher and the Brix number is lower. This stuff doesn't matter all that much, right? The actual, but basically, it creates an angle when it hits the liquid, and what we're measuring is the difference between the angle when it hits the liquid and the angle of the prism, and that corresponds with a scale, with a Brix scale that is basically tells us whether where the sugar content is. It's kind of does that make any sense? A little bit of sense? Again, if you want to fully understand it, you can read about it. But the way that we do this is we take a slice of we always use, if I were doing this for real, I would take distilled water and I would clean everything really well so I didn't have anything messing up my reading. I would clean off the knife and clean off this. But I'm not doing it for real. I'm just doing it as a demo. So I'm going to take a slice, try not to slice my finger. And I'm gonna take this handy dandy tool. And I'm going to hold that. Squeeze a little bit of juice onto my refractometer like that. And then I'm going to close it. And I'm going to look through it. And there's going to be a line. So that sugar content, we've gone up since we harvested, is at 12. So the Brix reading is 12. So it goes up as the sugar content increases. And if anyone wants to try it, or just even look through it, you can see there's basically blue and white where that line is. It gets fuzzier as it, can you see? Yeah, okay.
What's ideal for kiwi?
So ideal, I think in the industry, they harvest somewhere in the like 6 to 8 range. We have typically harvested closer to like 10 to 12, just because we're wanting to, I think you get better flavor if you wait. Sugars will continue to develop. So we put them into cold storage, and in cold storage, the sugars will continue to develop. And then we pull them out. Once we pull them out of cold storage, they'll soften. So the nice thing, if you harvest them at the right stage, they'll actually stay firm in cold storage, but simultaneously you're having some of that carbohydrate to sugar change. So the carbohydrates are turning into sugars, or the starches are turning into sugars, sorry. And then you pull them out, and then they'll soften. So that's, so the kind of big kiwi industry in California, they'll harvest, thousands of pounds and put them in big coolers, and then they can sell them out over time. Over months, really. So like 4 to 6 months.
When will we start giving them?
We usually will cold storage them for about 3 weeks, so just in
okay.
January.
Wow.
Yeah.
Coming up.
Yeah.